I've been really struggling with this lesson, thinking about where I wanted to start. And even now, I've got three different places I'm trying to figure out exactly where to start. I told Gloria I wanted this lesson to be a little bit less formal than some of my lessons. I do like to preach without PowerPoint every now and then. I feel sometimes like PowerPoint uh, just is a distraction sometimes. Some lessons I don't feel like it really helps, and this is one of those. But I want to try to get everyone thinking. I guess that's always the goal. Always the goal is to try to get people thinking, try to get us to reflect. I know you've heard me say this before, but if I present a lesson that doesn't challenge you, if I present a lesson that doesn't uh, cause you to ask some questions and reflect and make application, then I'm wasting your time. You know, your time is being wasted if you're not in some way challenged. And sometimes, that's on the listener as much as the speaker. It's on the listener. You need to challenge yourself. But I do, especially with this lesson, I feel the desire to really get us to internalize some things, to really ask some questions. And what I want to think about, and we just for a launching point, think about the passage in Matthew 7 where Jesus tells us in verse 1 not to judge not. And that passage is thrown out there quite regularly when we're trying to have religious discussion. We're talking about right and wrong. We're talking about what is sin, what is not sin, and somebody will throw that out there and say, "Well, you got no right to judge me. Jesus said not to judge." And obviously, he said not to judge. That is a true thing, and we need to understand what he meant by that. We could skip to the end, which I think a lot of times what we do is we skip to the end and say, "Well, I'm not judging you. What I'm trying to do is tell you what God has already judged on the subject." And I think ultimately that's right. If we're talking about matters of sin, matters of right and wrong, we need to get to God's judgment. What did God pronounce on the subject? And I think a lot of times in our society, we can see where people are making excuses for sin by using this umbrella and saying, "Well, you ought not to judge me. I can live how I want to live." But if God's called something a sin, it's a sin. And if I point that out, I'm not judging. All I'm doing is pointing out what he's already judged. That's not really the point of this lesson. What I want to try to spend a little bit more time on, which I think sometimes we don't spend as much time on, is what did Jesus actually mean? if he didn't mean, which we're quick to put, he didn't mean that we shouldn't point out sins in people's life, which I think that's true. What did he mean? What did he mean when he said not to judge? Don't judge one another. I want to go to a couple other passages where we see that. Let's first go to James chapter 4. It's not unique to Jesus' writings. It's certainly not unique to the scripture. James 4 uses the same terms and some other wording around it that I think really helps us to get a grasp of what is being communicated, what we're supposed to get. I'm going to pick up reading in verse 11, but it's right after we've been told to submit to God. Verse 7, humble ourselves under the hand of the Lord. Verse 10, this is foundational to our walk as Christians, is submitting to God, humbling ourselves to him. He's got to be Lord of our lives. People want to make Jesus Lord, but not do what he says. That doesn't work. So we have to start with that, listening to what he says, obeying his commandments. But look what he says right after that in verse 11. Do not speak evil against one another, brothers. The one who speaks evil against a brother or judges his brother speaks evil against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you're not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is only one lawgiver and judge, he who is able to save and to destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor? So you can see a couple of times there the language very similar to what Jesus uses, and couched in or framed in this idea of not speaking against one another, not speaking evil against one another. And so I want to put that phrase in our mind. Look, we ought not to speak evil against one another. So I can point out somebody's sin, I can point out somebody's error without speaking evil against them, right? I mean, this is something separate, something different. And he describes here, if you speak evil against your brother, then you're actually judging them. You're judging the law. You're determining the law. If you judge the law, he says you're not a doer, but you're a judge. And certainly none of us would claim to be a lawgiver. That term there in verse 12, it says there's only one lawgiver and judge. That's what we need to remember. That's one of the foundational things we need to remember. There's only one person that gets to make laws. There's only one person that makes laws. That's God. And that's the difference between where we're judging by pointing out someone's sin, pointing out God has said that that's a sinful activity. If you're engaged in that and I point it out, I'm not judging. I'm not a lawgiver. I'm just pointing out his law. I'm pointing out the law that he has given. This is not that, because he describes speaking evil against someone. Now I'm putting myself in the position of lawgiver. And that term there in verse 12, there's only one lawgiver and judge. He who is able to save and destroy. That's not us. Who are you to judge your neighbor? That's exactly what Jesus was driving at in Matthew 7, verse 1. Judge not, lest you be judged. Who are you to judge your neighbor? So I want us all to get that phrase in our head for this morning. Who am I? Ask it personally. Who am I to judge my neighbor? Who am I? I'm nobody. My opinion doesn't matter. God, he's the lawgiver. He makes the rules. I need to be trying to understand his rules for myself. And if I can, to understand them and help others to understand them, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. We ought to try to mature enough to where we can understand them and help others to understand them. That's wonderful. But don't ever cross that line to becoming a lawgiver. Don't ever cross that line to where you're making laws. You're binding something that God hasn't bound. And this is where we have to be so careful, because it's so easy. It's so easy for us to take in God's laws, take in the principles of God's laws, and then start to say, okay, well, in order for me to live this in my life, it's going to look like this, this, and that. So I'm going to do these things in my life. And then we start looking down on anybody who's not doing it the way we're doing it. We start looking down, judging people that are doing things differently than we are. And we have to be so careful about that we end up then binding what God has not bound. We end up putting ourselves in the position of the lawgiver. So again, before we leave this text, because we're not going to come back, the phrase at the beginning of verse 11, do not speak evil against one another. I want us to take that with us. Do not speak evil. Bring that with you. And then also in verse 12, at the end, who are you to judge your neighbor? Who are you to judge your neighbor? Bring that with you. And let's go to Romans. Romans, I want to stop first in chapter 2 real briefly, because here in chapter 2, you're going to see the distinction between God as the lawgiver and then us when we try to put ourselves in the position of lawgiver. That's the problem. If we try to put ourselves in that position, we're messing up. So here in verse 1 of chapter 2, he says, therefore you're without excuse, O man, every one of you who judges. For in passing judgment on one another, you condemn yourself, because you, the judge, practice the very same thing. Here in this text, he's telling us he's telling us that we, when we try to judge others, when we try to condemn others, we actually a lot of times end up condemning ourselves because we're living hypocritically. So here we are, we're looking at somebody else's life and saying, well, you shouldn't do that because God says that's sin. And in this case, look what he says, verse 2, we know the judgment of God rightly falls on those who practice such things. So this is a little bit different. This is us standing here, understanding God's law, seeing somebody who's outside of God's law, whose God's judgment rightly falls on them, and we point that out. Well, we haven't put ourselves in the position of lawgiver here. What's the problem? Here we're hypocritically breaking the law ourselves. So that's another problem. But you see this is the judgment of God rightly falls. This is a good illustration to show that if God's judgment rightly falls on them, they need to know about the fact that they're in error. They need to know about the fact that they're in sin. And it's appropriate for me to point that out as long as I'm not engaged in hypocrisy, as long as I'm not engaged in the same thing. So let's keep that kind of as a foundation again. But I want to go to Romans 14. Romans 14, we're not going to get into the whole chapter, but what you see here is a discussion of issues of conscience. This is not dealing with things that God has clearly ruled on. God has clearly made a law on. What he's dealing with is issues of judgment. And you can see down in verse 3, the issue is whether to eat meat or not to eat meat. And he describes, instructs us rather, not to pass judgment. Let not the one who abstains pass judgment. And then also in the beginning of verse 3, let not the one who eats despise. So there's the issue at hand where some people thought it was okay. Some people thought you shouldn't. The one who thought it was okay in verse 3, it was despising the one who didn't think it was okay. And then the one who didn't think it was okay was passing judgment on the other because they were doing it. And so you have one group despising and one group passing judgment. And the instruction given to both groups, the instruction to both people, whether you're going to despise somebody else's opinion or pass judgment on somebody else's opinion. Look what he says in verse 4. Who are you to pass judgment on the servant of another? So that's another phrase I want us to carry with us. Who am I? Who am I to pass judgment on the servant of another? We need to remember that other people are not our servants. They are not our servants. We don't get to pass judgment on them. We don't get to. Now, I can, if they're living in sin, if there's some kind of clear error and I point that out, well, now I'm just helping them hopefully to understand God's judgment, but I don't get to pass judgment on them in matters that God has not ruled on. And this is where, again, this language, I just want you to have that I want us to have it in our heads. Who am I to pass judgment on the servant of another? Who am I? So really with the meat of this lesson, I want us to spend a minute thinking about what does that mean? What does that mean? Before we leave this chapter, he describes down in verse 10, verse 10, he says, why do you pass judgment on your brother? Or why do you despise your brother? See these two problems. Why are you passing judgment? Why are you despising them? They have a different opinion from you. Their conscience is feeling differently about something. God hasn't ruled on it. Their conscience feels differently. You're tempted to judge them and they're tempted to despise you. He says, why do you do that? Middle of verse 10, for we will all stand before the judgment seat of God. You're not going to stand before my judgment seat, and I'm not going to stand before your judgment seat. We're all going to stand before the judgment seat of God. And he says, as it is written, as I live, says the Lord, every knee will bow to me, to him. Every tongue will confess to him. Verse 12, so each one of us will give an account of himself to God. Who are we to judge the servant of another? They will give an account to their master, not to me. They will give an account to their master. So I think we all understand that. I think I'm saying things that we all understand. But then how do we apply that? How do we live that? What are ways that maybe sometimes we fail in this regard? So I just want you to start thinking with me for a second. I think we tend to look down on others. We tend to judge others, sometimes judge our own brethren and look down on our own brethren for things like how we spend our money. Like, have you ever thought in your mind, like, man, why are they spending their money on that? There's so much better, so many better things they could spend their money on. Why'd they go and build that house? That's so gaudy. You know, why did they spend their money on that fancy thing or that fancy thing? Why are they driving that car? Why drive that car that you could have a much more efficient, more economical car? Why did they spend money on that? Have you ever thought that? Or have you ever heard somebody speak that way? I think we do quite often, where we look at others and we say, well, why are they doing that? They could have done something better with it than that. Recreational things. I think we are bad about looking at the way other people spend their money on recreation. Man, how wasteful of them to spend their money on this activity or that activity, or to buy, all that hunting gear or all that fishing gear, to spend that money on this vacation, or, whatever. How about time? Do you ever hear somebody, or do you ever yourself think like, man, are they going on vacation again? Are they going out of town again? How, frivolous of them. How frivolous of them to go on this vacation again, to spend this time out of town. Don't we tend to do that to one another? Don't we tend to despise one another a little bit and judge one another a little bit for that kind of thing? I really think that's the heart of these verses that we've looked at. Who are we to judge the servant of another? I didn't give them that money. Who gave them that money that they're spending? Who gave them that time that they're spending? God did, not me. They're going to give an account before Him. To their own master they will stand or fall, not me. Like if they want to spend their money that way and they want to spend their time with me, that's between them and God. Now, I will say, and maybe I'll probably say this a few times before the lesson is over, as brethren, it's okay for us to have a conversation about it. It's okay for me to have a conversation like, man, Martin, like, what were you thinking when you did this? What were you thinking when and I can do that with respect. I can do that without starting a fight. I can do that without judgment. I can do that without disdain, to say, man, I really wouldn't have done it that way. I really wouldn't have done that. But that's different from disdaining someone in your heart, or passing judgment on them, or what we usually do, talking about them behind their back. Isn't that what we a lot of times do, is talk about them behind their back? Is, why did they do this? Why did they do that? Did you see what they spent their money on? Did you see where they're going this time again? That's what we often do, isn't it? What about maybe some more serious things, like how they discipline their children? How you parent. It's easy, I think, sometimes to look down on that. And again, those are conversations worth having. If I've got a concern about, how you're raising your child, and I raise that concern to you, I think I can do that in a respectful, loving manner, without passing judgment and without despising. It's like, hey, Darren, I've been noticing this. I've been noticing that. I think maybe you should think about this. I think maybe you should think about this. Now, I'm not trying to be overcritical. I think maybe pray about it and just think about it. That's okay, isn't it? That's okay. But let's be careful not to cross that line into the realm of lawgiver, where we start saying, I know what's right. You need to listen to me. Or as I say, talking about them behind their back. I think we could add to that list. In fact, as we move forward, if you think about some things that maybe I don't mention, let me know, and maybe we can come back on this at some point. But just to add some scriptural examples to this, come with me to, I can't read my notes here. Come with me to Luke 10. Come with me to Luke 10. A couple of stories here. Luke 10, picking up about verse 38. So this is a story of Mary and Martha. We know them pretty well, Lazarus' sisters. And Jesus here, verse 38, is entering a village. A woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her to help me. The Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. So what is Martha doing here? Martha here is judging the servant of another. She's looking at Mary and saying, where is she? Here I am in the kitchen. Here I am taking care of these people. And where is she? I could use some help. What is she doing? Sitting at the feet. I need help. That's one of our tendencies to sit here and say, I'm busy with this. I'm over here doing this thing, and they should be helping me. They should be helping me with this thing that I think is the most important. Where are they when I need them? She's now looking at Mary judgmentally. And of course, Jesus, I think, puts her in her place, reminds her that Mary has chosen the good part. Mary's focused on the teaching. She's sitting at Jesus' feet. What an amazing thing. Just think about, was Martha wrong to be interested in serving? That's the other. Sometimes we take the story too far and say, well, Martha should have been sitting at his feet too. And well, maybe she should have, but maybe she was doing exactly what she should be doing. maybe that's where she needed to be. Somebody's got to serve. Somebody's got to take care of that. Maybe she was doing exactly what Mary would have been just as wrong, I think, in turning to the kitchen and saying, Lord, do you not care that my sister is not sitting at your feet? Do you not care that my sister is not here? We have to be careful of judging the servant of another. To their own master, they will stand or fall. Let God worry about that. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to think about what we're doing. We need to think about how we're serving the Lord. Will my master be happy with me? Don't look at the servant of another and worry about that. The whole story wouldn't have happened if Martha hadn't welcomed Jesus into her house. Verse 38. Mary wouldn't have had the opportunity to sit at Jesus' feet if Martha hadn't have been who Martha was. That's pretty important to remember. God uses us all in different ways. We're not all meant to do the same thing. We're not all meant to be the same thing. Stop trying to hold each other to your standard. Stop trying to get one another to be what you are. To your master you will stand or fall. To their master they will stand or fall. Come over to John 12. John 12, same two people. Same people. Here in chapter 12 of John. Chapter 12, verse 1, the Passover is here. Jesus comes to Bethany where Lazarus was. They gave a dinner for him there. Who's doing the serving here? Verse 2. Good old Martha. Like, is she wrong for doing that? No, she's doing what she can. She's doing what she should. That's important to remember because we have a tendency to judge both ways. Mary, therefore, verse 3, took a pound of expensive ointment and made from pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of that perfume. How wasteful, how wasteful. Expensive perfume, a whole pound of it. What's the point? Oh, you stunk up the whole place, Mary. What in the world? Judas, and the text points out he didn't care about the poor, verse 6. But he says, why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? Like, basically what he's doing is turning to Mary, really to the whole room, and saying, we could have done something better with this. We could have done something better with this. Here you've gone and you've put it all on his feet. That's just great. We could have done all this. We could have done that. This is a really powerful example for what we tend to do. We look at the service of others. This is how they spent their money. This is how they spent their time. They could have done that better. If they had bought a cheaper car, then they could afford to give more to the Lord, or they could afford to help these people. Or if they didn't have such an expensive vehicle, then they could have this, they could have that. Like, that wasn't your stuff. That was their stuff. They can do what they want to with their stuff. That's between them and God. Stop worrying about what other people are doing with their stuff. When you get it to these terms, it starts to feel very childish, doesn't it? We're very childish sometimes. The way we look at other people, like, why are they doing that? Why are they doing this? They could have done something better. This text, helps us to understand Judas didn't care really, and I think sometimes our own weaknesses, our own flaws are betrayed when we start pointing out the flaws of others. We're so busy, picking at the specks in other people's eyes. This is again Matthew 7. We're so busy picking at the specks of other people's eyes that we can't see the beam in our own eye. That's oftentimes true, and this is certainly true for Judas here. He's so busy thinking about how we could have done better with that perfume that he's about to betray the Lord. He's about to betray the Lord. Worry about yourself, Judas. Worry about yourself and stop worrying about other people. Jesus says in verse 7, leave her alone. If you want another phrase to put in your head, how about that one? Leave them alone. Who are you to judge the servant of another? Stop speaking badly about other people. Who are you? Leave them alone. Leave her alone. There's a statement about her faith here. She's done it for my burial. There's something in that that's worth meditating on. Mary had heard, remember she was sitting at Jesus' feet. She had heard what Jesus was preaching. And apparently she understood it better than just about anybody. Apparently she understood. Remember, the apostles didn't understand. When he said, the Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of evil men, he's going to suffer and die, and on the third day be raised. And the apostles were like, wonder what he means. What does he mean? Meanwhile, Mary is anointing his feet for burial. I mean, she got it. She understood something that the others didn't. That's amazing. Jesus makes a statement here in verse 8 that really helps us with this lesson. Verse 8, he says, the poor you have with you always. This is one of those things we need to remember. We can always make an argument. It's like, man, if they would have not bought that car, or if they would have built a simpler house, if they would have this, or if they would have that, then they could have addressed this problem or that problem. It's like, you know what? The poor are always going to be with us. There are always going to be problems. There are always going to be people in need. And yes, we need to be trying to help where we can, but that's the key. I need to be trying to help where I can. You need to be trying to help where you can. And I need to be careful about passing judgment on you. And you need to be careful about passing judgment on me. Let me do what I feel like is best with what I have. And you do what is best with what you have. And we need to be very careful about passing judgment on how each other uses the things we've been given. To our own master, we will stand or fall. I've got several other little examples. We actually have some good time left. What about the widow's mite? The 2 small copper coins, remember? How silly, for her to put those 2 coins in the collection. What difference does 2 coins make? What difference? 2 copper coins. The rich people, remember, they're going in and putting in out of their abundance. They're filling up that collection plate. And she walks up and she puts 2 coins in. What a waste. Keep your 2 coins. We don't need your 2 coins. God was happy with her. God was pleased with her. And I could see an argument, like if I'm the one with the 2 coins, and I could think, what difference does this make? I'm walking up and the collection plate's full from these rich people, and I'm thinking, what difference does my 2 copper coins make? That's between you and God. Don't worry about what's already in there. This is between you and God. This is what he gave you. What are you going to do with it? Don't worry about what everybody else thinks. Everybody else is worried about what you're going to do with your copper coins. Don't worry about that. She put it in the plate. She gave all that she had, and that was a beautiful thing to Jesus. That was a beautiful thing. He appreciated that. I was thinking about the feeding of the 5,000, because that was Trussville's VBS was one talking about the 5,000. 5,000 men are fed along with women and children. Huge miracle. God in that on that occasion did exceedingly abundantly beyond what anyone could have asked or thought on that occasion. How does that all start? Why is that miracle worked in the way that it is? Because one little boy said, I've got 5 loaves. I've got 2 fishes. One little boy. And man, if I was his friend, I'd be jabbing in the rim saying, man, come on. What good is 5 loaves and 2 fishes among this crowd? Keep them and we'll share them. We can eat. I can eat. Don't give them to those people. You'll never get a bite. It's going to disappear. But he did what he felt was right. And he shared his lunch. He shared his lunch with this crowd of people. He shared it with Jesus, and Jesus turned it into something amazing. He turned it into something beautiful. That's the problem that we create when we pass judgment on others. Sometimes what we do is we end up discouraging others. We end up discouraging others and like throwing water on their faith, just destroying their faith, destroying what they're trying to do. And just need to be so careful about that. In Acts chapter 4, we're told toward the end of the chapter where the disciples were selling what they had and they were giving to the apostles, and the apostles were distributing. And it's a beautiful picture there. But one thing that we don't ever see is that's a command. And in fact, when we see how Ananias and Sapphira translated that, we can understand very clearly that it wasn't commanded, it wasn't expected, because Ananias and Sapphira, they went and they sold and they gave part of it to the apostles and lied and said that was all of it, when it wasn't. And in the aftermath of that, Peter tells them, he says, you didn't have to sell it. And even after you sold it, the proceeds were yours. You could have done whatever you wanted to. Yeah, I know some people like Barnabas. Barnabas gave all of it. You didn't have to do that. That was between Barnabas and his master. You sold your land and you could have done anything you wanted. That's what Peter says there in chapter 5. You could have done anything you wanted to. It was yours. But you lied about it. That was the problem. That's an example of people being worried, doing their good deeds in order to be seen of men. Jesus says, beware of that. Beware of doing your good deeds to be seen of men. That's what Ananias and Sapphira were worried about. They're kind of almost another angle on this principle is knowing that people are going to pass judgment, knowing people are going to see what I'm doing. I'm going to try to really do something great so that people can observe and people can pat me on the back. Like, they're not your master. Don't worry about what they think about you. Beware of practicing your good deeds to be seen of them. Do your good deeds so your heavenly Father can see them. That's what we need to focus on. One lawgiver. Who are we? Who are we to judge the servant of another? Just to wrap things up a little bit, which may take a minute, so don't put your Bibles up just yet. But Jesus tells us to love one another. What does that look like? Like, what should I do in order to love my brethren? He tells us to serve one another. Serve one another. What does that look like? Is that always going to look the same? The way I serve, is that going to look the same as the way somebody else serves, the way Scott serves? Is it going to be the same? He tells us to be hospitable. We're supposed to be hospitable. Hospitality in the New Testament, that word involves doing good to strangers, not people that you know so much, but doing good to strangers. Does that mean every time I run into a stranger, I got to crack my wallet open and hand them a 20? Is that what hospitality is? But maybe sometimes that's the right thing to do. Maybe sometimes that would be appropriate. We have a tendency to say, well, this is what, when God tells me to love my fellow man, he tells me to love my enemies even. This is what I feel like I need to do. I need to do this. And then we look at others and say, well, they're not doing what I'm doing. And we pass judgment or we disdain them. Galatians 6:10 tells us to do good. I love how general that statement is. Do good to all men, especially those of the household of faith. What does that look like? To Martha, that meant inviting them into her home, and serving them. To Mary, that meant sitting at his feet and taking in the teaching. It can be different. It can be different. We need to be careful about expecting the same thing from each other. Turn to 1 Timothy 6. There's a little bullet point list here in 1 Timothy 6. 1 Timothy 6, pick up in verse, or just verse 18, I guess. Do good. They are to do good, be rich in good works, be generous, and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves and a good fortune for the future, that they may take hold of that which is truly life. So do good, rich in good works, generous, ready to share. These are very general things. God asks us to love each other, share, do good, be generous. What me being generous looks like might be different than what somebody else being generous looks like. We need to be careful about holding each other to the standard of what I think is right. But we need to take this in. This is one of the points of this lesson is when I'm sitting here saying we need to be careful about passing judgment on the servant of another, but we all need to remember we are the servant of God. We are the servant of God, and we will all stand before His judgment seat, and He's going to ask you, were you generous? Were you ready to share? Were you hospitable? What did you do with what I gave you? What did you do with the time I gave you? What did you do with the money I gave you? You're going to give an account to Him, not me or anybody else. You're going to give an account to Him. So these things, we have, I think what happens a lot of times is, well, you ought not to judge me. You ought not to expect, me to do this or that. You're passing judgment on me. It's like, that's fine, but are you judging yourself? Are you examining yourself? Are you challenging yourself to do good and to share and to love your brothers? I know the way you love and the way you're generous and the way you're hospitable will probably look different than the way I am. That's fine, but are you doing these things? And we need to ask ourselves those questions. Let's go Romans 12. I've got two more passages. First, Romans 12. We'll look at a few verses and then finish with one final passage in Philippians. Romans 12, there's a great text here. If you have time this afternoon, just read over it. And again, don't worry about the servant of another. Worry about yourself. As you read this text, don't worry about how other people are living this. Worry about how you're living this. Are you living these things? Verse 9, let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil, hold to what is good. How are you doing at that? Don't worry about anybody else. How are you doing at that? Are you loving? Are you holding fast to what is good? Verse 10, love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal, but fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope, patient in tribulation, constant in prayer, contributing to the needs of the saints, seeking to show hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. You see how these things are very personal. These are very personal, and we need to take them in for ourselves. Don't worry about how somebody else is living these things. Worry about how you're living these things. You are going to stand and account. How did you do at living in harmony? How did you do at being genuine in your love? How did you do in showing hospitality, constant in prayer? How did you do? That's what you need to concern yourself with. He tells us, repay no one evil for evil, verse 17. Be at peace with all men. Just really good thoughts. You could do that in a lot of scriptures and just go there and think about, how am I doing with these things? And don't worry about someone else. In that text, he told us, verse 16, not to be haughty, not to be wise in your own sight. This part of the problem is we're wise in our own sight. We think we've got it figured out. Everybody else should be doing it the way we're doing it, and we're despising, passing judgment. Fade back up to verse 3. He says, for by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think. Don't think of yourself higher than you ought to think. Remember, you are not the lawgiver. There is one judge. There is one lawgiver, and that's not us. It's not me. It's not you. Let's not think higher of ourselves than we ought to. I'm going to turn to Philippians 2. We'll finish with this verse. Philippians 2 and verse 12. Paul speaking to the Philippian Christians, who he was very high on. I mean, they were an encouragement to him. They had blessed him in so many ways. They're a picture of very mature Christians, as we see from Paul. And he tells them here in Philippians 2 and verse 12, as you have always obeyed, so now not only in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. When we read things like, I need to love, we need to serve, we need to be hospitable, we need to this, we need to that, you need to take those words into your mind and work out your own salvation. How are you doing with that command? How are you doing with that principle? Don't worry about how somebody else is living that. Now, as I said, we could say one more time, it's okay for us to encourage one another. It's okay for us to sit down and say, hey, I'd just like to talk to you about this. I've been, wondering about how you've been doing this or how you've been doing that. And, I think it'd be something worth thinking about and praying about. And that's fine, but let's not be judgmental about it. Let's not despise. Let's not talk behind others' back. And let's remember the main point. The most important thing is to work out our own salvation, to make sure we are ready to stand before our judge, and knowing that, to their own master, they will stand or fall. We need to leave that between them and God. I appreciate so much your attention. I hope that this has been profitable to consider. I do think it's worth meditating on, not putting ourselves in the position of judge, making sure that we are being merciful and loving and patient with one another, not thinking of ourselves higher than we ought to think. As we conclude the lesson, conclude our service, we'll offer an invitation song. If anyone needs to come forward and make confession, if you need to ask for the prayers of the church, whatever the case may be, please take advantage of this time as we stand and sing.